My name is Jeanette McGillicuddy. I'm a member of the Chaska Historical Society. I'm also one of the team members that facilitated the Why Chaska exhibit for this year. And I'm going to be looking at the early immigration, not only from the European area, but also from within the United States. And we'll start by looking at 4 of the early pioneers and discuss them briefly. First, this is a photo of Hendrik Hammers and his wife. He came from the Limburg area of Belgium. He was 23 at the time in 1863. And also coming with him was his wife, Regina. They had a farm in Limburg, but they sold their segment of the farm and then came to the United States. Initially he worked in the brickyard, and by 1875 they had 7 children. Eventually they had 14 children, only 7 survived to adulthood. This was not unusual. By 1880 he had changed his name to Henry, so no longer Henrik, was Henry. They were in a 40-acre farm in Chaska, which quite frankly is just up the hill. And in part of the house was a saloon. It was called a farmer's saloon. By 1900 he was a full-time farmer. Regina died in 1903 and Henry died in 1913. The next individual I want to look at is Emmeline Shepard Noble Lee. She immigrated with her family from Northampton, Massachusetts. And at the time, she was young. And she was the first teacher in Chaska when the Chaska Public School was opened. She was 17. Not unusual. In 1864, she was the first teacher at the Moravian Academy, and that was when it opened. By 1880, she and her husband and her son were living in St. Paul, and they were running a boarding house. Her husband was Linus John Lee. She died in 1929. Now we go to George Faber. George Faber came from Luxembourg. In 1852, he was 25 years old. He was considered a 49er, having gone to California and sought gold. Obviously did quite well, because he came back to Chaska and became a merchant. He also eventually got into politics and served several positions. His wife Genevieve was born in Baden, Germany. And she immigrated in 1853, and she was 14 at the time. George died in 1894, and he left Genevieve with 10 children. She did not die until 1918. Again, not unusual. And our final picture here, if we can get at it here, this is Frederick Iltus. Frederick Iltus came from Alsace, France, with his family. He served in the Union Army from 1862 to 1865, and when he left the service, he was a first sergeant. In 1866, he married Minna Müller. In 1880, they had 6 children, and he was working as a laborer. By 1900, he had a lightning job business, and by 1910, he was, according to the census, a full-time electrician. He died in 1937. Now, some of the items that immigrants either brought with them or that they obtained when they got to this country are what we're going to look at now. First of all, we have a wagon wheel. This would have been used, obviously, on wagons, and different sizes of wagon wheels. And they were either used on wagons or they were used the wheels, the wood wheels, were used in order to have horses draw a plow. So the horses, and we have 2 horse collars here, along with a depiction of what they looked like when they were on a horse. And again, these were used either by the farmer to help plow their field, or the horses were going to pull the wagon so they could get their product to the market. Okay, here we have a trunk that was brought to this country by Katharina Stans. That was her married name. And she and her husband came in 1881 from Limburg in Belgium. Her husband Henry died in 1890. She had, between the 2 of them, obviously, they had 14 children. Unfortunately, only 4 survived. She died a very tragic death in 1920, the victim of being run over by an automobile here in Chaska. Next, we're looking at a German Catholic Bible. This is from Guardian Angels Church, and it has been loaned by them. It was used by the Franciscans. Next, we have a full display here of woodworking tools. Some of these tools the immigrants would have brought with them. Others they purchased when they got here. Some of them they may have even put together themselves. But these would have been used by woodworkers. They would have been used by carvers. So they had quite a lot of usage around a farm, or even in town as a carpenter. So you can see we've got a variety of saws, we've got a variety of wrenches, planes. This is an example of a spinning wheel that would have been used. This actually is probably from the early 1900s. And one of our members, his great-grandmother used it. Pioneer dress and apron. It has a lot of variability. It can expand very easily. So you've got a lot of options with a dress of this type. The quilt that's shown here is pseudo 1860-ish. So the pattern, the fabrics are all new, but it's a type of quilt pattern that would have been done at that point in time during the Civil War. The rocking chair is from the Civil War also, and it was made by this gentleman, John Thomas Aspden, and it is bent wood.